All right, so now we're going to talk about scale. So scale, essentially, is literally what you're looking at. What are we looking at here? We're looking at the world. We're looking at the globe. That's our scale, global scale. For a fancy definition, the scale is the relationship between the portion of the Earth being studied and the Earth as a whole. What incarnation does that mean? Well, the relationship here is that we are looking at a global scale. That is what we're looking at. Out of the world, we are looking at the world, a global scale. Scale determines how much detail is shown on the map. So when we're looking at a global scale, we can look at data from the whole world, every single country, all 195 of them. And sometimes if you're looking at a scale, let's say of one country, a national scale like Australia, we only look at the data in Australia, but we can look at more specific data within Australia. So of course, this is a global scale because we're looking at the world. What's the scale of this? We're looking at Canada. We can see a little more specific information about the inner mechanisms of Canada, but it's still Canada. So it's a country scale. You could also say a national scale if you'd like to. What about this one? This is Buffalo, New York. Buffalo is a city, so we're looking at a city scale. I hope you're catching on to the trend here. So we're looking at South America. South America is a continent. So we're looking at a continental scale. It doesn't matter what the data is. It just matters what are we looking at. We're looking at a continent, so it's a continental scale. Now we're looking at South Asia. We're not just looking at India here. We're looking at different countries now. So it's not a national scale. Since we're looking at South Asia, which is a region, it's a regional scale. Okay, now we're looking at a very local area. I don't even know where this is. I just found a picture of it. It's not a city. It's a little section of a city. It's not a big region, so I wouldn't use regional. I would say it's a local scale. A local scale is just kind of a local area. It's more community-like. So maybe if you have a few streets or so, that's a local scale. Okay, so let's go through a different concept here regarding scale. So we're looking at large scale and small scale. So this map on the left here of Portland, Maine is considered a large scale map. Now, why is it large scale? We're looking at less area. That is correct. But in terms of human geography, large scale means large detail. We can look at individual streets and blocks of Portland, Maine. We can't do this with the map on the right because we're looking at a small scale map on the right, which has smaller amounts of detail to it. We can look at, yes, the individual counties of Maine, but we can't look at what's happening really within those counties. We can't look and get as much data, as much information about the inner workings of Portland with the right map. The left map, we can look at the individual regions of Portland if we'd like to, but we can't do that with the map on the right. So small scale, small detail. Large scale, large detail. The less area that you're looking at, the larger scale you're looking at. It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like the reverse, but that's just how it is. What would be a smaller scale map than this map of Maine here? A smaller scale map would be a map of the whole United States. A map smaller scale of that would be a map of North America. A smaller scale or map would be a map of the world. So out of these two maps, we have a map of East Asia and we have a map of just China. Which one's the larger scale map? So the larger scale map has the most specific detail, and that's going to be the one right here, the map of China, because we could look at the individual regions of China. On the other map, we couldn't really do that because it would be very hard to interpret and analyze. So this is the larger scale map. We're covering the lesser area. All right, let's do some more scale. So what is the scale of this data? We're not saying large scale, small scale. We're asking for the actual geographic scale in proportion to the world. So let's see here. Let's read the title. Top 10 U.S. cities with the largest population increase. So we're looking at cities in the U.S. It's not a city scale because we're looking at multiple cities, but we're looking at cities in a country. So it's a country/national scale. What about this data here? 10 fastest growing cities in Texas. Again, so we're looking at different cities, so it's not a city scale, but we're looking at cities within a state, Texas. So it's going to be a state scale. Another term that you can use with these states, sometimes they'll give you provinces of a country like Canada, but if you have a map or in this case a chart or a table with the states state data, like in the United States or Australia or another country with states. Nigeria is another one. Mexico is another one. You could say state scale, or you could say sub-national. Sub means beneath, so beneath national means it's not as big as a country, it's smaller. Great. What about this one? This is what's considered a population pyramid. We'll learn more about this in Unit 2. But we can just read here that we're seeing the population structure per gender in Western Africa. Western Africa is not a country, it's a region, so it's regional scale. There you go. What about this? This is South Africa. We're looking at, it looks like just a reference map here of South Africa. Now, South Africa is a country. So we're looking at a national scale. South Africa is not a region. If you're trying to talk about Southern Africa, say Southern Africa. If you have to say that on your FRQ, please say Southern Africa. Because if you say South Africa, they're going to think you're talking about the country here. You could say West Africa, that's okay. But say Southern Africa. All right, so here's some more just basic questions regarding scale. I'm putting a lot at you because this is something that students oftentimes can get confused, especially when we learn a future concept in 1.6. We won't get there just yet. We're just going to focus on scale, though. So what scale should be used? If we were creating a map with 4 different maps, what scales would we use here? So let's say we were comparing property tax rates within South Carolina. Property tax rates, they vary per county. So we're looking at South Carolina counties. That's South Carolina. That's a state. That would be a subnational or a state scale. Subnational, smaller than a country. Subnational also has to be within a country. Now, thankfully, most of the world is just countries and oceans, so makes it easier. So comparing the number of Muslims in New England is what we're looking at, and New England is a region, so that's regional. Analyzing which countries Taylor Swift has been on her tours. Her tours have been global. Sometimes you're going to have questions like this. That's going to have to make you think about them a little bit. It's like, okay, where has this phenomenon occurred? Taylor Swift's been all over the world. She's been to so many different countries. So we're probably going to use a global scale if we were to make a map of this. And then finally, what if we were comparing the immigration rates between the 18 French administrative regions? Well, France is a country, so that would be a national scale. Great. It doesn't matter what we're comparing the data between, if it's between different regions, even if it's between different countries, and we're looking at a global scale, between different counties, we could still be at a state scale. It doesn't matter what the data is being compared between, and it doesn't matter what the data is. It just matters at what we're looking at. That's what determines the scale. What are we looking at? Are we looking at the United States? Great, that's a country scale. Are we looking at Europe? Great, that's a continental scale. Are we looking at temperature for the whole world? That's fine. It's a global scale. So let's look at some past FRQs to see how College Board likes to test scale. These are very recent FRQs. So College Board has this in their brain currently, and it's moping around a little bit. So this is from 2023, Set 1 FRQ 3. You'll have 3 FRQs on your AP exam, and 2 of these FRQs will have stimuli. What is stimuli? A stimuli is like a map. It could be a chart. It could be a graph. It could be an excerpt if they really wanted to. It could also just be a picture. It could be a picture of a landscape, of a farm. It could be a picture of a good or a service. It could be a lot of stuff. So you'll have to get used to, reading maps, analyzing pictures, and analyzing charts. If you don't know how to read a graph, I would learn how to read a graph because that could be important on your AP exam. So let's see here. Describe the spatial pattern of companies and institutions shown on the map. So this is an actual FRQ prompt, part A for FRQ 3, and it's asking us to describe the spatial pattern of the company. So let's look at the map because it tells us to. And the map showing us major medical and biotechnology companies and institutions in the Boston and Providence region. So we're looking at the Boston region here. And then we get a little more specific. We're getting into a more local area. So the spatial pattern. Let's look at some actual responses that College Board gave on the rubric. So we could say there's a clustering of economic activities. We could say that there is a cluster of economic activities here in Boston. There's a concentration among the transportation routes, like the interstates or the rivers. They said arterial roads. That's just fancy. You could have said roads or interstates. There's also a concentration of similar economic activities within a metropolitan area, or the Boston metropolitan area. The simplest, though, would be there's a clustering of similar activities. So when it says describe the spatial pattern, it's just asking you, okay, the companies and institutions are clustered together in Boston. They're clustered, we could say, among the rivers, like the Charles River here, or clustered on the interstates and roads, that sort of thing. And then this is another question I threw just to practice at, is what are the scales of the maps? Okay, so the first one's regional, because we're looking at a region of the United States. We can see Rhode Island. We can see part of Massachusetts, not all of Massachusetts. You could also say subnational probably, and that would be okay. And then the smaller, little more specific map would be local, because we're looking at a very local area of the Boston area. We're not looking at just Boston. We're looking at Cambridge as well, which is 2 different towns technically. So it wouldn't be a city scale. So the big map focuses on a regional scale. They didn't ask what the scale was on the AP exam because they told you for this part here. So we have to explain a possible limitation of drawing a conclusion about the entire country from a regional scale map. So let's say we looked at this map and we said there's a clustering of economic activities among rivers throughout the United States. What's the limitation of drawing a national scale conclusion? So the rubric gave us 4 different answer choices. On an FRQ on the AP exam, you have to have something that's on the rubric. If your response is not on the rubric, or like a synonym of a word on the rubric, you can't get the point. And that's just how it is for almost every AP exam. It kind of sucks sometimes, but that's just how it is. And you'll practice FRQs relentlessly before the AP exam, so you'll get good at saying what's on the rubric and talking in College Board talk like this, because some of this may just sound so foreign to you. It's like, I don't write that way. That's okay. And the rubric has everything in one sentence. You'll be writing these explain prompts in probably 3 to 5 sentences at the minimum. That's okay. All right, back to this FRQ though. I'm sorry if I stressed you out a little bit. So what's a limitation of drawing a country scale conclusion from a regional scale map? Well, let's read. I'll just read it straight out. A limitation would be it attempts to analyze research data from one scale of analysis to make claims about another scale of analysis, may be inaccurate due to change in scale's effect on spatial analysis. So essentially what you could say is attempting to discuss data from multiple scales would be inaccurate because they're in different areas. Yeah. You could say, so making research assumptions from map data at one scale of analysis to claims about another scale of analysis may result in inaccurate calculations or ecological fallacy, or these are just fancy words. You could literally just say it's inaccurate because we're looking at different areas, because we're looking at different scales, and the world is different. That's essentially what they want you to say. And then the region can be specialized in a sector. So more economic definition is that the Massachusetts region is more specialized in a certain economic area or industry. And different regions throughout the country specialize in different economic practices. The United States is a big country. There's more areas specialized for farming and more areas specialized to more service-based industries. Like in Silicon Valley, that's a very, very much so tech-oriented area. But in areas in Nebraska, they're farming. In Idaho, they're growing potatoes. They're not making Apple laptops. And then the last one, the region can have a long and continuing tradition of valuable or productive sectors that are very different from the changing mix of economic sectors that categorize the country's economy. So what this says is that Boston's has a tradition of economic prosperity. I mean, look at the colleges. That's probably what someone would talk about, is the colleges. Is that the productivity in Massachusetts is long-standing. It's been going on for a long time. And then in the rest of the country, it's changing very rapidly. In Massachusetts is a lot more historical because Massachusetts was one of the original 13 colonies, so it's going to be a lot more historical there. A lot of the practices in Massachusetts, particularly in Boston, have probably been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, Harvard, MIT, all the other universities there have been there for hundreds of years. They have practices set in stone, very traditional economic practices. So another limitation question. So what's a limitation of using this map here to understand the geography of religion in present-day Africa? So let's look at the map. Larger cultural groups in West Africa. Now, religion is a cultural trait. Religion is not a culture. Religion is a cultural trait. So that kind of sets us up there for our response. But let's see what we could have said. The map shows cultural groups which are not synonymous with religions. That's what I just said. You could also say the map only shows West Africa, not Africa as a whole. If you read the question, it says present-day Africa. So it's difficult to understand what's happening with religion at a continental scale when we have only data from a regional scale. There are many cultural groups in Africa that have populations and individuals practicing different religions. So it's impossible to know which religion is practiced in a given area. There might be cultural groups that practice different religions. In the United States, the American nation has so many different religions here. We can't just categorize the United States as this is a Baptist country, this is a Catholic country. No, because so many people practice so many different religions. You can also say this map only shows areas where the cultural groups are the dominant. It doesn't show the minority cultural groups. It doesn't show any diversity of cultural groups or diversity of religions that may be practiced in those areas. It also doesn't have a key. If you notice, it doesn't have a map key or a map legend. So you may not be able to interpret or analyze this information that well. And that kind of sounds like a stupid answer, but College Board will do that on purpose. They may not give you a map key because they want a student or two to say, yeah, there's no map key. How am I supposed to analyze this information? Because map keys are pretty important sometimes to analyzing the information. And look here, it's a choropleth map. So hang on. So it doesn't show us what these shades mean. What in the world do the little dots mean or the lines mean? So yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, one more FRQ for this topic. So another limitation. College Board loves these limitation questions. Explain a possible limitation of using this map to describe the political conflict on the island of Ireland. So there were like 8 responses. I didn't pick all 8 because some of them had to do with the politics unit, and we haven't done the politics unit yet. So I chose specific ones to go out of here. But what's the map showing? The map is showing 2 countries, Ireland and the United Kingdom, and it's not showing any thematic data, so it's a reference map. So what's the limitation of using this map to describe the political conflict? Well, you could say the map doesn't provide detail on what's causing the political conflict. It doesn't show what's happening culturally or religiously at a regional scale or even a local scale at Ireland. So we don't even know why the conflict's happening. It's just showing us the countries. It also doesn't provide any information regarding where the conflict's occurring. Maybe it's occurring in the whole country. Maybe it's not occurring in the whole country. It's not, by the way. For the most part, it's occurring near the border of Northern Ireland and Ireland. I'm not going to explain it too much, but essentially, the Catholic nationalists of Ireland want to make Northern Ireland part of the whole country, while the Protestant Unionists in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland don't want that to happen. They want to stay part of the United Kingdom. And then there's another question, what is the scale of the map? Well, we're looking at 2 countries. That's what the map key shows us. We're looking at the Republic of Ireland, and we're looking at the United Kingdom. So we're looking at a region, technically. So it's a regional scale. Why is it not a national scale? A national scale only shows you one country. If we were looking at just the United Kingdom, or we were looking at just Ireland, or we were looking at just Iceland, or Canada, or Mexico, or one specific country, then it's a national scale. Now let's talk about the national census. This is something that I know you're going to hear in your class or read in your textbook. So I want you to learn about it and learn about it right. So what's the national census? You may have an idea of what it is already. So a census, a lot of countries do a census, and they are just to count the population. Count the population of the country, count the population of a nation, or just a specific area, like a state in the country. It records information from the population, not just the numbers, but it can also include information about the age of the population. Maybe they have a more older population, or they're finding out that they have a very young population. They could also look at gender. Maybe they have more males than females within the country, as well as occupation. population. Maybe they want to see how many farmers there are, how many people are involved in manufacturing, how many people are involved in services, how many people are teachers, how many people are involved in tourism, and the variety of the economic sectors within the country. It may also include data about the region's agricultural and business sectors. It could show what areas devoted to farmland or not. The United States Census is conducted every 10 years, every decade, and historically, in every single time besides 1 year, it was done with door-to-door servicing. They had hundreds of thousands of officials go and knock on the doors and ask you questions for the census. Like the main question was that they got from every household was how many people live in the household, because they wanted to count the population. That's what the census is, essentially. It all comes down to counting the population. That's the main goal. Everything else kind of comes after that. In 2020, the most recent national census, the next one's in 2030, the census was done remotely. You could have done this online, you could have done this over the phone, or you could have mailed it to the Census Bureau. Now, the census is not perfect. It's the best that we have, but it's not perfect. It typically undercounts homeless people. For one, in 2020, homeless people typically don't have access to the internet as much as people who are not homeless. And people may be counted twice if they move. This was a lot more prevalent probably without the digital census when they knocked on the doors, because they can't just all knock on the doors on the same day. It's a long process. It's months and months of knocking on doors and asking people, how many people live in your house? What race are you? How old are you? What's your gender? That sort of thing. So people who move, they may be counted twice, maybe sometimes 3 times if they're that lucky. So let's look at some census data so you can kind of get a sense of what the census is. The census is important to the government and certain businesses, but it's also important to you because it gets you to know what's happening within your country, what trends there are. You can actually look at data within your local community and just see what's happening in the area that you live or the state that you live. People have a lot of pride in where they live, guys. So let's look at Louisiana. Louisiana will be our state of focus. So the census gives us data like the total population, and it'll say, the year that the census was taken. So this is 2020, the most recent census, and the population was about 4.65 million. It can give the change in population. So the change in population was from a 10-year period from the last census to the 2020 census, and this shows a positive growth in population within Louisiana. It's not a whole heck of a lot of growth, but there's some growth. It's about 2.7%. It tells us how many houses there were. So there were about 2 million housing units. So this is houses, this is trailer homes, this is apartment units. So on average, there's a little above 2 people per household. So yeah. And then there's a vacancy rate. How many houses don't have people in them? And that's about 12%. As well as the percent change in housing units. This is just the same thing. How has it changed since the last census? We can look at the census data and go a little more specific than the entire state. We can look at the individual counties. In Louisiana, they're actually called parishes. So we can see here, what are the most populated parishes? So East Baton Rouge Parish, that's near the capital of the state, has the most people. Then there's Jefferson Parish, then New Orleans Parish. Orleans Parish is in New Orleans, and so on. You can go down and see what the least populated counties are in the state. We can also look at a map of census data. This is very useful because we don't have to read a chart. We can just look at a map and say, okay, where are the trends happening? Where are these clusters of populations? We can see here diversity index. This is comprised of all the data of the different races and ethnic groups and different people living in the states. So the diversity index shows which counties are the most diverse and which ones are the most homogenous. We can see the most diverse ones are the ones closer to the cities, closer to Baton Rouge, closer to Shreveport, New Orleans, that sort of thing, which makes sense. That's typically how it works. And then we have another map here. We have the percentage of population that are an adult. So our adult populations are typically higher in the north and then in the south in Louisiana. And we also have a percentage here that 76.7% of Louisiana is an adult. 23.3% are kids. Other data here, we can look at specific races. Where are certain races concentrated? So we could see that American Indian and Alaska Native are concentrated in certain counties, while there may be little to none in other counties. Same thing with Black or African Americans. We see a lot more Black and African Americans closer to New Orleans and Shreveport than in other areas of the state. And then this is the rent, actually, for not different areas, but different cohorts of value. So what percentage of people are paying certain amounts of rent? So for the most part, 40% roughly of Louisiana is paying either $500 to $999 for rent per person. This is per person, by the way. It's not per household. So who uses the national census? I said that, businesses, governments, and even you can use the national census, and that's true. So a bunch of people, a bunch of organizations and corporations and individuals can use the national census at local scales, regional scales, and country scales. So government agencies can use census data to plan and implement policies, which is legislation, which is law. And they can do this related to education, like who needs more schools. They can do this for healthcare, who has an aging population that may have more healthcare needs, as well as housing. Is there a high housing vacancy rate? Maybe we don't need to build housing because there's housing available. As well as transportation services. Where are populations clustered that may need more transportation to support one another? As well as social services, again, with that aging thing. Where is there a more elderly population that might need more social security plans? As well as economic development. Where are the more urban areas occurring? Are people all moving to one area? That probably means that there's economic prosperity happening in that area. So we can look at which schools may need more funding because they have more students now. What counties need more schools or housing or transportation because of increased population growth? Which healthcare programs are needed in specific areas like vaccination programs? Private sector organizations like businesses can use census data for marketing, planning their business. They could use it for investment decisions. What areas look good to invest in? It can also help businesses understand who their consumers are. Maybe their consumers, for the most part, are of a certain race or a certain age or even a certain gender. I'm pretty sure makeup companies target women more than they target men. They could also look at labor market trends. They could look at regional economic conditions. Maybe areas aren't good to put a business, so they're not going to put a business there. They could also look at potential market opportunities. So they could look at where is everyone moving? That's a lot of population. That's a big market. We should open up an Olive Garden there. So some other specific examples would be retailers could analyze census data to identify target markets, decide on where they want to put store locations. Because remember, the point of a business is to make money. So they're going to put their store locations in areas that'll make them money. They could tailor marketing strategies to specific consumer demographics like culture and age. A business in India is not going to do well if they have a lot of beef products. So they won't tailor their company with beef products in India. A little more specific is real estate developers. They can use the data on where to build houses. Maybe there's a housing shortage in place. If they have a housing vacancy of 30%, they're not going to build houses because there's houses available. Maybe they could build a lot of mansions if they're in a high income area. Or if they're in a low income area, real estate developers will develop lower income housing. Let's continue. So we can look at environmental organizations. Where is everyone moving? Where are the population densities really, really high? Because that means that we're putting a lot of strain on the environment and our environmental resources. And we could advocate for more sustainable development practices. If we're building a lot of housing, we're probably cutting down a lot of trees. Maybe we need to put in some conservation efforts to preserve the environment. We could also have city planners use the census to assess where population growth is occurring. We could actually look at what they're called census tracts, and we could see in a city what regions of a city see the most population growth. We could see if maybe certain areas of the city are becoming more concentrated with men, women, maybe with families or retirees. We could look at needs to build urban infrastructure like roads or electricity services. We could look at public services like transportation, as well as just community development in general. Architects and engineers can use census data to design buildings and infrastructure that meet the needs of diverse populations. Maybe they have populations that have a lot of disabilities. They have to put in a lot more maybe disabled parking and other services. as well as focusing on sustainable needs. If they're in an area with a high population density, maybe they're going to promote environmental sustainability a little bit more because of that increased strain on the environment to support that many people. Manufacturers can even use census data to see, okay, where are the educated people are located. Maybe they need a more educated workforce. Maybe they don't need them. Maybe they can put in training programs somewhere, or even forecast future labor market trends. Maybe they say, okay, this part of Louisiana, that's where our labor is probably going to come from, so we need to target that area. You can also use it. Like I said, you can know what kind of community you're in. You can assess housing and neighborhood trends. You can even use it for entrepreneurship. Maybe you live in an area where business is booming, or you're in a high income area. You can use it to start a business. You can also use it for political engagement to see, okay, maybe certain politicians will help areas like mine the most, and that can influencing your voting or your campaigning if you want to run for an election. Let's look at satellite imagery. So satellite imagery is just something else College Board says we have to discuss a little bit more. How might satellite imagery be used at a national scale? So I'm just going to go through these quickly. So national agencies like FEMA can use satellite images to allocate federal disaster relief funds, so they can look at environmental damage. They can just monitor what the environment's looking at, and they can divert their resources as needed. Governments use imagery for surveillance, military operations, and intelligence gathering. They can use it for security. National infrastructure projects like interstates that cover the whole country, like I-95 covering the whole East Coast, can be planned with better information on the geography of certain areas. Maybe there's a more hilly area. They're going to have to spend a little more time building the interstate there. How might a satellite image be used at a local scale, like within a city? Farmers can use the imagery to monitor crop health, soil conditions, and water usage. Local governments can use it for zoning, like for schools, land use planning, and managing public services like water facilities. Businesses can use imagery for site selection on where to build their businesses. They want to build it away maybe from an interstate if it's too loud, or it's just hard to get to the location. I see sometimes stores and stuff driving down the interstate, and there's no exit. I'm like, where are these stores just at? How do you get to them? They could also be monitoring construction progresses with the satellite imagery as well. So look at some examples here. So a typhoon in the Philippines about 11 years ago, I think it's Typhoon Haiyan. You can also see Yolanda if you'd like to. They used satellite imagery to extend the damage in the Philippines and see where the damage was most prevalent and where they need to plan the emergency response here. So this is an actual satellite image. We can see the before and after. There's a considerable amount of damage here in this region. The image helped finding the most severely affected areas, finding which areas weren't really affected. And it also allowed for the diversion of resources to these affected areas, as well as timely rescue operations. They could quickly see where they needed to probably send the search and rescue operations. It also helped in mapping out necessary rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts. What areas were destroyed? We also use satellite imagery to monitor North Korea. Yes, we do. Countries like the United States, South Korea, they use it to monitor their North Korean missile tests. They don't want them getting out of hand because they don't want the world to blow up. They monitor their military activities. And this is used for security purposes, defense purposes, and making sure that there's compliance with international agreements. We actually use satellite imagery with oil spills, like in the Gulf of Mexico, to see the extent of the damage, see how big the oil spill really was, what areas were contaminated, where cleanup operations needed, how big were these cleanup operations. We could also look at the environmental impact here, as well as use it for legal purposes against responsible parties. Who was responsible for the oil spill? Look what you did. It was X big, and it caused X amount of damage. That's what the satellite images told us. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.